I hope that you and President Putin get together and can solve your problem. That would be a tremendous achievement. And I know you're trying to do that. I hope that you and President Putin get together and can solve your problem. That would be a tremendous achievement. And I know you're trying to do that.
That's just a little throwback to 2019. Like, it is obviously absurd now in the context of all that we know about what's going on with Russia's insane, barbaric, illegal war, the invasion of Ukraine. I just want to be clear. It was a crazy thing for Trump to say back in 2019. And the facial expression of Volodymyr Zelensky, like, dude, do you know anything about what's going on in the world? You can see right there, that is everybody staring at our president, our country, the state of our society over those 4 years. Now, we have, of course, moved past the Trump presidency, and we've moved past the infantile idea that, like, just work it out with Putin or whatever. And as you're gonna see, we're launching into a absolutely massive movement of both Russian troops as well as armor in the east of Ukraine. We're gonna be giving you the details on that. But I just thought that throwback, David, like, put stuff in context, that we had a president who cared so little and knew even less.
And I love also there's Zelensky trying so hard to kind of keep it together. I mean, you can see the gears going in his head and he's thinking, oh my God, what a moron. But he's trying not to be undiplomatic. He's just trying to, kind of keep it together. Poor guy.
Yeah, and it's honestly, it's the sort of position that men like Trump have put a lot of women in, where they just have to be agreeable with them, because unfortunately these people are equally awful and able to ruin their lives, their careers, and all that. In the case of Volodymyr Zelensky, the idea was you had to pretend that Trump was legitimate, knew what he was talking about, because Trump could just decide to not give you the aid that you need desperately. And remember, it wasn't long after this video that we found out that he was trying to blackmail Zelensky to get him to get involved in the 2020 election. So just, it's a confluence of so many amazing and now in hindsight, even more horrible things. But as I said, the invasion is continuing. The pulling back of Russian forces that they talked about turned out to be what we predicted. It was a brief regrouping, and now the war is on. The siege of places like Mariupol, a number of other places, never stopped. But Zelensky announced just yesterday that the offensive in the Donbas region has begun. They say it's an assault on a scale not seen since World War II, which that might be true. Obviously, our invasion of Iraq was a large-scale invasion, but that's how they're pitching it. He says a very significant part of the Russian army is now concentrated for that offensive. No matter how many servicemen get thrown there, we will fight, we will defend ourselves. We will do that every day. And you can see here a little map of the current territory that's being held by the Russians. Obviously significant, probably not what they would have predicted 50 some odd days ago. I think they would have thought that entire map would have been orange at this point, David. But this is expected to be a more difficult period for the Ukrainians. It's gonna be less focused on urban warfare, some of the sort of terrain that's made it a little bit easier for them to counter the large number of armored vehicles, tanks, things like that. Now it's a little bit more large and wide open territory where the Russians might have a bit more of an advantage.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a different kind of war now. And as you mentioned, the guerrilla tactics won't really work. It's far more open spaces. This is where the Russia's strategic numerical advantage could really come into play. But it's also worth remembering this is an area that has seen a lot of shelling over the last several years. There have been skirmishes throughout the Donbas region for several years. So I'm not sure it's gonna be the cakewalk that the Russians anticipate, because there's so much frustration already with them. However, it's certainly gonna be very rough sledding for the Ukrainians as they try to figure out, okay, is it worth really trying to defend Donbas, or is it at a certain point, do they just realize, no, Russia's gonna be able to conquer Donbas and that's that?
Yeah, Zelensky had said over just the past few days that there's no peace that's gonna be brokered by giving up eastern Ukraine. That said, it might not be up to him, and you say what you say, but the situation changes. That said, the predictions are that Russia's gonna be more successful in this new phase. Bear in mind, I'm no more an expert on this situation than I was in the beginning, and the predictions have been largely wrong from the very beginning. So God only knows. That's why we're staying on this story and giving you updates, including updates like this. The Kremlin is dodging questions about what exactly happened to the crew of the Moskva. We covered that story late last week, and considering the fact that it had been being towed basically to port, that it had there were other ships in the area, my assumption that I stated on the show was, well, clearly they had the time to offload the crew. Well, they're acting as if there's something fishy going on. And in fact, family members of the missing crew are asking questions and receiving basically no information. They're publishing their account on social media saying we're trying to find out what happened to our kids, and they're not receiving any confirmation. One mother said that her husband had asked a military commander where their son was, to which the commander replied, well, in the sea somewhere, that's an odd way to put that. But anyway, they're not being clear. One would think whether the official story, which is that a fire spontaneously was ignited and then the ship just sunk into the ocean, whether that's true or that the Neptune missiles fired by the Ukrainians sunk it, whichever of those is true, one would think the Russians would want to reassure their people that they had saved as many soldiers as possible, but thus far they're being very tight-fisted about the information.
Yeah, and either way, you can expect that there were at least some fatalities, right? Even if it's the Russia version of events, that there was a fire and an explosion, that's going to kill some of the 500 members of the crew. If it's a missile that sinks the ship rather quickly, then it could be more of them. I mean, there have been some reports that apparently only 60 or 70 of the crew members have been accounted for, and the rest have not. And there have been some reporting that in Sevastopol, which was the Crimean base where the Moskva crew was essentially based, that the cars of some of the sailors were still there. And you would think that, well, if the crew had been able to actually get back to the port, they would take their cars and they would be able to drive away, but nobody had claimed the cars. So there's all sorts of rumors and speculation going back and forth. And the only thing we know for sure is that the Moskva itself is now part of the Russian submarine navy, although not very operable.
Exactly. Yeah, I personally, like I've been saying from the very beginning, I hope that every one of them survived, and that I hope that they go back to Russia and end the invasion. That would be my hope. Of course, it's hardly up to us. For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.